Hello world, I'm Colleen and welcome to my glamorous life. I'm that almost 50-year-old mom with 3 teenagers here to give you helpful tips, tricks, and honest reviews. And on Wednesdays, we do weird history and makeup. So if that's something that you're into, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon for notifications. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Egyptian thoughts on the afterlife and their mummification process. Let's get to it. All right, so Egyptian mummification. Whenever you hear somebody say the word mummy, the first thing that comes to mind for most of us is Egypt. You've got King Tut and the famous golden sarcophagus. You've got the mummy movies, God bless Brendan Fraser and those pecs. But what really was going on in Egypt? Why did they mummify their bodies? And how did they do it? We'll get to that in a minute. First, we're going to start off with the ColourPop Pretty Fresh Hyaluronic Acid Tinted Moisturizer for our foundation today. And I am simply going to take a little of it on my finger and I'm going to dot it around my face. Making sure I get everywhere I want to cover with a little bit of this on there, wipe off any excess. I'm going to take a foundation brush. This one happens to be a flat Morphe brush, and I'm just going to buff that in. Now, with tinted moisturizer, you can definitely use your hands. I kind of prefer using the brush with this one just because it gives me a little more even coverage, and I can direct exactly where I'm going to put it. Now, that's not to say I won't go back with my fingers and touch up if I need to. But this gives me a nice finish. Okay, so Egyptian death practices. Well, it starts off with the fact that Egyptians didn't believe that life ended with death. In fact, there was a whole hierarchy of things you had to do to survive in the afterlife. This is why when we find a mummy or a grave in Egypt, you'll find what they call grave goods, jars of wine, jars of honey, jars of food, makeup. Cosmetics were very big in Egypt. Sometimes you'll find additional bodies buried that they assume were slaves that were buried with the deceased. Cats, hawks, their children, if they had babies that didn't survive infancy. And King Tut's tomb, there were apparently 2 infants who were either stillborn or miscarried. So these things, it was like a common thing for them. I'm going to hold off on doing my concealer till after I get my eyes done. So we're going to prime our eyes with the Urban Decay, I always say this wrong. We're going to prime our eyes with the Urban Decay Eyeshadow Primer Potion. I recently figured out that I was having a reaction to the Morphe ColourPop. Editing Colleen here. It was actually the MAC ColourPop. Sorry about that. And every time I would take my shadow off, my eyes looked like literally I had salt crust all over them because I had all these little white lines where my eyes had just completely dried out. And I finally made the connection that this only happens when I use the Morphe. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm not using that anymore. I will say that with Urban Decay, I've actually leaned toward this one and I don't have any problems with it. So for eyeshadow today, we're using the Ciate London. This is the Velvet palette. This palette really is pretty much all shimmer. I have dug my nails into it accidentally doing a video, but it's all shimmers. There's no mattes in it, and it is possible, totally possible, to do an eye look with all shimmers regardless of how old you are. So as we get into this here, I'm going to take initially, let's see, I'm going to go with this shade right here, and we're just going to kind of pack that into my crease here. Now, the term mummy brings to mind the linen wrapped villain of the mummy movies, right? Everybody knows the classic, the mummy wrapped in toilet paper or whatever, that linen wrapped decaying corpse. Now, the term mummy actually has nothing to do with a linen-wrapped body. It's actually an English version of a word borrowed from Latin, which is mumia, and that in turn was borrowed from Arabic in the Middle Ages and stuff from the word mumia, which stems from the Persian mum, which means wax. So how did we go from wax to linen? Not really sure. The term originally was meant to just signify any embalmed corpse because, sometimes they would wax the corpse and that sort of thing. But it just kind of developed the modern terminology when the mummified bodies in Egypt were found. I'm going to go in and kind of define my crease a little bit with this right here. I've got this rather stiff kind of flat brush here that we're going to go in and just kind of define that crease a little bit more. So the pre-dynastic mummies that were found, they're called Gabelline, I think it is. They were found, and they are actually like from 3400 BCE, so like way before the Common Era. There were 6 bodies that were naturally mummified because of the climate and the area. It was naturally arid, very dry and hot, so it dehydrated the body, preserving it because no microbes could grow. And Glamourous was located around 40 kilometers south of where Thebes was. So you can imagine the ancient Egyptians finding, a mummified body, or they buried their kin and then they go back to visit them and they're mummified. They look like they're almost alive, but they're just dried out. So this kind of, we think, may have led to the belief that mummifying the body would allow the body to continue in the next life. Now I'm going to take this really pretty kind of coral peach here and put that on my lid. So the Egyptians developed a whole philosophy that death did not end life. So they had rituals and a long drawn out process to prepare the body for the afterlife. So you didn't just die and get buried. There was a lot involved. The preservation of the body was probably one of the more important aspects, because in order to secure all your possessions and continue in the next life, you had to be whole, mummified. So they found some mummies where pieces were replaced, if you will, like an arm bone was missing, so they put a stick in. The biggest thing that was important in this reincarnation was Ka, which is the concept of the soul. And basically, they believed that Ka, the soul, left the body at death and could only be returned to a preserved body. So you can only have a preserved body go in front of the god of Osiris, who was the afterlife, and have them reunite you with your body for the rest of eternity. But if the body isn't preserved, this cannot happen. So the mummification process took a long time for them to figure out. I mean, it started out, let's do a little highlight here. I'm going to use this one for highlight. It started out with, obviously the natural mummification processes that happened like at Glamourous, where the land just automatically preserved the body. But then they had to develop ways to do this. And one of the things that they found was a natural salt there in Egypt called natron. So they packed this natural salt from the Nile around these bodies, and it would dry them quickly. And by drying them quickly, it prevented the decay that would cause the body to no longer be whole when it sees Osiris. All right, let's contour while I'm waiting here. I'm thinking, yeah, let's do a little contour. So I got this for my birthday gift at Sephora. This is the Nars Laguna blush, and I opened it up and went, ooh, that's contour. So we're going to contour it with this today because this is a nice deep dark blush. I love the lipstick that came with it, but I'm not using that today. Yeah, see? Nice contour. Anyhow, so they would prepare the body for mummification. And I'm sure many of you have heard they stick a hook up your nose and pull your brain out because they didn't feel that the brain was the seat of anything. The brain wasn't important. So they stick a hook up your nose, scramble your brains, and pour them out your nose. Now, part of this was because they didn't think the brain was worth anything. And part of it, you know, it may be because they didn't think it was worth anything. It just happened to work out this way. But by doing that, they halted a lot of the decay that the brain would cause. Now, the rest of the organs, not the brain, but the rest of the organs were carefully removed from the abdominal cavity and placed into canopic jars. Now, we find canopic jars from all over, but none with brains in them because the brains were unimportant. Go figure. We're going to use the Laura Mercier blush color infusion in peach today for my blush. I really kind of like this one. This is one that was gifted to me. I've done a review on it already, so, you know, whatever. I do like it because it's got a little bit of highlight to it without being overly shiny in my face as blush. Though I do like the shiny blush a little bit. I kind of like I did the Jeffree Star review last week, and I like the new highlighter palette for blush. I'm not going to lie. So there were like 3 different classes of embalming in Egypt. You could pay for like, it's kind of like today, you know, you have like the bare minimum funeral where you get like the pine box and you're thrown in the ground or whatever. Then you have the super high embalmed hair, everything, and you know, big funeral procession. It's kind of similar. There's like a range of embalming processes in Egypt too. So we're going to use a highlighter from Ciate London. This is one I got in a sample from Etsy. And I think it's meant to be a blush actually, but it really works out really well as a highlighter. So I'm just going to take a little of my finger and run that right along the top of my cheekbone where I want it to pop. A little on the nose, make me look younger. Have you noticed lately, I have to ask, I know this is sidetracking, but have you noticed that all of a sudden everybody is doing like the Rudolph blush? It's like really, 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 really pink on the cheeks and then right over the nose, and it's like blush central on the nose. I can't figure it out because to me it looks like you're sneezing all the time. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too old and set in my ways sometimes. Okay, where was I? What was I doing? Oh yeah. Blah, 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 blah. We're going to do a little bit of our concealer now. And once again, I'm going to be using the ColourPop Pretty Fresh Hyaluronic Acid Concealer. This is actually one of my favorite ones because honestly, this one does not dry out my under eyes overly bad, which I hate when concealer does that. I absolutely love the new Fenty powder foundation. And so I went out and I bought the liquid and I bought the concealer. And the concealer didn't perform as well as I wanted it to. It covered beautifully. It just didn't look as nice on my skin as I wanted it to. I'm going to start by tapping this around a little bit and see if I need to brush it out or not. No, I think it's going to be fine today. Anyhow, so as I was saying before I got so off the rails, there were like different levels of embalming. You could go in and have the basic embalming, where basically they just stuck your body in natron and they really didn't remove anything. Or they gave you jars of stuff that were empty. But the upper classes, they're the ones where you get the really detailed embalming. That's why most of the time when we find mummies, they're the upper crust, if you will. The pharaohs, the higher class members of society, because they could afford to do the full, I think it was, I want to say it's like a 40-day process. It was a very long process to mummify a body because it had to sit in the natron for so long, and you know, they had to do all this removal of stuff and everything. And then once they shrunk the body down with the natron and all the organs are removed, they had to stuff the body, and they do it with aromatic herbs and oils and resins and such to make the body smell good and be filled out. So poor families, they kind of had to let the body start decomposing before it went to the embalmers because they couldn't afford everything. And if they didn't let him start decomposing, unfortunately, there were some not so savory types that would perform like acts of necrophilia on the body. So depending on where you were, it just depends on how much was involved. So like if they didn't open your abdominal cavity to, we're going to use this under the eyes here. If they didn't open your abdominal cavity to remove your organs because you weren't high enough status or rich enough, then they'd basically put like cedar oil in there to liquefy your innards. Because they weren't going to pull them out. They weren't going to save them for the afterlife, so they just liquefied them. So I'm not sure exactly how that worked when you went up before Osiris and your insides were all liquid. I don't know. So the canopic jars that they would put the organs in were guarded by different gods. Like the stomach was guarded by, I'm going to totally butcher this name, Duamatef. Probably not pronounced right. Who's a jackal-headed god. So the stomach jars had the jackal on the top. So it just depended on what organ it was. That's how we can identify it now. We figured that out. They also, for the richer mummies, would, when they were wrapping them to basically hold everything together, make everything nice, amulets and charms would be embedded in the wrappings to protect the deceased and to aid them on their journey. And then, of course, the grave goods would be placed in the grave with them. There was, if you've ever read or seen any of the stuff on Tutankhamun, there were mirrors and food, and the honey that they found in these tombs was still edible. Honey never really goes bad. That's the beautiful thing about it. But there was so much riches. This is why there was so much looting of tombs and why it is so difficult to find intact tombs, because families have found over the years, there's some who have found that their houses were actually built over ancient tombs, and they just don't tell anybody, and they tunnel down underneath the house and they find artifacts and sell them for profit. This Egyptology and the mummies especially were huge business, especially in the Victorian era. It was like a status symbol to have a mummy in your parlor, I guess. They would buy these mummies, have them shipped from Egypt, display the coffin, the sarcophagus. And a lot of times the sarcophaguses that they had were not the sarcophagus of the mummy. They may have been reproductions or what have you. So I'm sorry, this was the Kiss Lash Glue Liner, and I'm going to go in with my Araceli liner just to fill in between my lashes underneath that where the falsies will not sit. So yeah, mummies have become big business. Even still, there's a black market for it. A lot of people are trying to get all of these mummies that were like sent throughout Europe and the Americas returned to Egypt. There's a big push for that because the Egyptian government views it as basically stealing their culture. So a lot of these mummies are being returned to Egypt, to their national museum. And it's kind of interesting. I've seen an Egyptian mummy, and don't ask me which one it was because I don't remember, but it was years ago in a museum, and I'm sure that mummy is no longer there. I'm going to use the Benefit They're Real Magnetic mascara today because I actually kind of like this stuff. So I've seen an Egyptian mummy, and I wish I could remember where, but I don't remember. But I've seen one, and it's, nothing spectacular. It's a dried body wrapped with linen, and then they had the x-ray of the mummy there for you to see, so you could see what it looked like on the inside. dead body. And I've seen more naturally preserved mummies too. South American mummies and mummies from here in America where, Native Americans had been buried and then found perfectly mummified. There's a big difference between the two. The Egyptian mummies, they're very, very dry, obviously, because they've been sitting in the salt and all this, and usually wrapped ornately, and there's grave goods and everything with them. And a lot of times the Native Americans, I remember one mummy I saw, and I want to say I saw it at the San Diego Natural History Museum. I could be wrong. But it was a young woman from South America who was found basically crouched in a fetal position, and she still had her clothing on, and it was like she just looked like she was asleep. So there's a lot of difference between what the Egyptians did and what happened elsewhere. Now I'm going to put on a set of lashes today, and I've put these on before, and they were just too long. So I'm going to show you how I trim my lashes while I'm doing this today because, well, I can. I'm going to go ahead and pop it off here. Okay, so I have these cute little lash vaults that I store my lashes in when I'm not wearing them, so I can do them several times. So you see this it's pretty big yet. And when I put it over my eye, it like covers everything. But the problem is when I close my eye, the inner corner wrinkles in and everything munches up. So I'm going to take the longer end, the outside end, and I'm just going to cut maybe 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch right off from the band side right there, just to shorten this up. Now you can save that little piece. You can pop it on top of this one. You can glue it to each other, whatever. But I just like to pop that little bit off so that my lashes don't bunch up. Now these are Ardell lashes that I'm putting on today. I found these and I kind of like them because they're nice and long, but they're not like so full that they cover everything I've done in my eyeshadow. So what about these mummies' curses? We've all heard about the Curse of Tutankhamun, how everybody that was involved in finding his tomb ended up dead. Is this because there really was a curse? Is this all coincidental? What? Well, a lot of times curses were placed on these tombs as a deterrent, just like you would a beware of dog sign, if you will. You put the beware of dog sign on the fence in the hopes that people, decide that, well, maybe I don't want to mess with that particular house, right? So you would put on the tomb, all who enter here beware because you're going to die or whatever. I'm going to use the St. Luke's Love Letter lip liner today. And anyhow, so they would put these curses on the tombs kind of as a keep out, warning, keep out. So did people believe that these curses were like truly magical and could harm them? I'm going to say no because of the number of tombs that have been raided over the years. People have just gone in and pulled all the stuff out of the tomb. So how could it, are they going to attribute the demise of everybody that's ever raided a tomb? Because I'm sure there's still tomb raiders out there that are doing stuff. So I don't believe that the curse itself was real. What I think happened literally is that you had a bunch of people in the Victorian era traveling to a foreign country. One of them died because he cut himself shaving and the wound went septic. Okay. Another one had a mosquito bite that went bad. We didn't have antibiotics. I haven't heard of anybody in modern times, and if you have, do me a favor, put it in the comments, that has perished because of the curse of King Tut. Egyptian afterlife. I kind of have to wonder, what makes this kind of weird to me is that the belief was you had to have an intact body and such to meet Osiris and get your ka returned. So what happened to the poor? Are their souls still out there? I don't know. We have a lot of weird traditions with funerals. You know, you've got the vampires need their heads cut off and a stake driven through them, or they're buried upside down so they can't rise out of the grave. You've got witches that needed to be burned at the stake, and then there's just so many weird practices around death. So we may revisit this topic again in a future episode. But for now, that's kind of the basics of Egyptian mummies. I mean, I'm sure I could get into it more, but why have, you know, a 2-hour video on Egyptian mummies while I'm doing my makeup for 2 hours? That would be bad. So that's it for today. Friday is going to be another review. I have partnered with a friend of mine, so I will see you then. Ta-ta.